Welcome back to Cornerstone Live. My name is Mackenzie Moore and I'm a consultant here at Cornerstone Data.
And I'm Joy Akins. I'm the president of the company.
I'm pretty excited about our new series we're starting today, Analysis of Per Aspera and Ad Astra, Part 1. Governor Kelly launched an Ad Astra plan back in April, and we realized that we have never discussed the difficulties when it comes to using data to reach the stars. We decided to take a step back from the day-to-day reporting of numbers and colors and focus on the use of data in managing this pandemic by KDHE.
Right. I mean, this is really what we do for companies. I spent my career stepping into industries, learning about them, their data, the questions they have, and their data culture. And one of the first steps is often assessing their data maturity. Data maturity measures how advanced an organization's data analysis is and how well the culture uses data to inform their decisions. In fact, Mackenzie, your first project with us was data maturity assessment. So tell everybody how we met.
I started my career in data analytics working for WSU on the Cornerstone Data intern team, and our first project was to assess the data maturity of the city of Wichita.
Yeah, and you were the team leader. It was a great team. Those students, some of them have already launched their careers. They're finishing college just like you, and they're working at Cornerstone Data. Some are working for Coke, others are working for Keycentrix, a software partner that we work with. So really excited to see those students get launched into their career. Well, when we assess the data maturity of an organization, we take several areas into consideration. So I'm going to share my screen here and let's walk through some slides. So the first thing we look for when what we think about when we're looking at data maturity, we look for accuracy, usability, transparency, and communication. And all of these items, if they have to be in place just to start at a base level of maturity in the organization. And once they're there and they're going well, then data maturity would lead to collaboration across the organization spanning multiple disciplines. And that means that in a highly mature organization, you'll see data from multiple departments being used to solve problems. You might have somebody from finance and HR and sales and supply chain and inventory all looking at data together, and they have access to each other's data, and it's defined and they understand what it means, and they can use it to leverage information and searches and analysis in their own area. When you have that begin to happen, you start to see innovation in the organization because people understand more about the company, how it works, and then they can bring their own piece of knowledge in, and they begin to work as they begin to work together. And so they find unique and different ways to solve problems they've had before. It also allows the empowerment inside of an organization, a company. The employees feel empowered because they have the information they need to make change, but it also helps citizens in municipal organizations to think about how they can manage whatever's happening in their life. So one thing to remember about data maturity in an organization is it's always shaped by leadership. Leadership has an impact on every single one of these items, and one of the things we work with when we work with leaders is upping their game in that leadership area.
So usually we get an inside view of this information by working with the leaders within the organization. What makes this review unique is that we are users of the data.
Right, and while we aren't actually interviewing KDHE and getting all the specific mechanisms for their reporting system to determine accuracy, as users of the data, I think we can make some good and specific observations. I've been in the data since March and April and May, and you've been in the data daily since you started working for us in May. So I think, we've had a lot of experience in the data and we've seen things change over time. So let's start by talking about accuracy. When we're assessing accuracy, we're trying to determine whether the organizations have the systems and processes in place to make sure that they have correct and timely data and that it's available to their audience. And in this case, the audience is the public. We're also looking to see if there's a peer review process in place that helps ensure the accuracy over time and ask questions about how the audience views things. In fact, we have one here we talk about all the time. We check each other's work is one way of thinking about it, but that's a very important part of the process is this peer review process. But we also look to see how data is updated and how questions from the public are resolved. So over time, we've publicly documented several issues of accuracy at the KDHE site, but we can look across the state for some other examples as well. I'm going to pop this one up here. This was a Facebook page by the Johnson County Health Department back in late October. They said that when they were looking at data, they were doing a review of their data, they realized that there were 1,000 negative tests not being counted on their dashboard starting the week of October 11th, because one of the labs, local labs, hadn't sent the data over to KDHE, who they get their data from. And this, raises questions about the checks and balances that are in place between KDHE and labs in their reporting, because these discrepancies weren't found until the 28th of October. They were from October 11th, and they weren't fixed until November 2nd, which was several weeks out. So, you want to think about what's the process for reconciling those numbers, and what if Johnson County hadn't known about those 1,000 negative tests? How would KDHE know that they didn't have them in their reporting? That would be an important thing to understand. Another thing, most people know about the cluster reporting that started in September. They know that KDHE was reporting clusters on the 9th, and then they stepped back from reporting them because of feedback they received. But many people might not know some of the examples of what was happening and the discrepancies there, especially if you live in an urban area. You may not have noticed it or seen some of the stories, but here's an example from Dodge City. And the Dodge City Hall was named as a cluster case in that November 9th report. They listed City Hall as having 13 active cases. And the City Hall said, well, that's not true. We had 13 cases, but they were in June. Everybody's recovered and we're back to work. It's September now. The other thing they were unsure about in Dodge City was when they say City Hall has 13 cases, do they mean the fire department and the police department too, or just City Hall workers? It was really not clear. And so not only not accurate, but also not clear. Pittsburgh, Kansas paper has the similar story. But you'll notice the date on this one is September 24th, which is after reporting restarted. In the original September 9th report, they listed clusters as active from June, like the Sugar Creek cluster, which had 174 cases, but those were from June, not from September. But in their September 23rd report, they stated that Pittsburgh Community Schools had an outbreak of 9 cases in the previous 14 days and was a cluster. But in this article in the Morning Sun in Pittsburgh, the public school district noted that there were 4 cases, all were outside school exposure. None of them happened at school, and it was not considered by public health authorities to be a cluster outbreak at the school. So really local health authorities and state health authorities were had a difference in how they saw that. So let's bump over to this KDHE reporting map that we have here and look at a couple of other things. We've posted several items in the past about this, but let's just cover them and see what they look like. So this first one is around percent positive. We did a little bit about this on our Facebook page, and a lot of our fans figured out what the right number was, but I just wanted to look at this and see why this accuracy matters. So when you first look at this data, it looks like it's correct after 17% October 31st, 17% positive. The problem starts happening when I want to drill down to the data and look at a specific week. And why this is important is sometimes we are looking at a week's worth of data. We want to see where we were at in that week, not just a specific day. And you can see that all of a sudden it tells me the week of October 25th, I had a 98% positive rate. Over here on the week of November 1st, it was 142%. Oh my goodness, Mackenzie, there were more people sick than were tested. And if I drill in even further, sorry, wrong way. If I drill in even further to the month, because maybe I want to see where we were in September, it says in Kansas, we had 297% positive. So clearly there's something wrong in this reporting. He's known about this issue since at least October 30th. Dr. Norman commented on our post where we mentioned it, but nobody's done anything to resolve it. It's still a problem. And here we are, the 10th of November, we're still seeing it. I want to look at something more important or maybe more impactful that's had a real direct impact recently on local officials as they've tried to manage the pandemic. We've documented issues with hospital capacity data losing beds, ICU beds, and then finding them again on our Facebook page. And we'll have new links in the blog post. I want to focus on this new item that's really significant. Because of that issue, we began reconciling our hospital capacity data, and Mackenzie came to me and said, there's something really wrong. Our number of available inpatient beds has dropped significantly. This is a sample of the spreadsheet that we use to look at that data. And so you'll notice that here was the original report that we had for how many beds are available on the 19th of October. And then here's today what those numbers say. So we went from 7,500 available inpatient beds, according to KDHE's website, to 3,300, which is just astounding. What happened there? So, we've asked some questions and looked around. We weren't able to get answers, but we started looking at some data over at healthdata.gov at the state level and seeing that this number of inpatient beds is most likely the number of staffed beds in the state. So what that means is maybe Wesley Hospital here in Sedgwick County has 500 beds in a unit and 300 are filled. They would have 200 available, and that's what should go in that column. But what was going in that column was 500. So very significant change that got made on the KDHE website, and there's no documentation about it. There's no statements about it. And so you can see that's, in Kansas City, Missouri for that date, it's 189% change over what was said. So almost 3 times fewer beds, or a third of the beds were available. So why does this matter? Well, at the same time that all of this was happening, we were trying to look at data and provide reports for people that use us. We were getting calls from commissioners that they were their hospitals were full and they didn't understand because they just looked at the data a few days before and the data said maybe they had 2,000 or 500 beds available. So they didn't understand what the discrepancy was. And we were telling them, we don't know what's happening. It looks like there's beds available from the data we gleaned from KDHE, but, their local hospitals are saying they're not. What's going on? And so there was a lot of firefighting and trying to figure out what's happening in that scenario instead of seeing the rise happen gradually and being able to jump in and be more proactive. And you can see some of the changes in this data. Going back to the 1st of October in Kansas City, it's a negative 255%, which is a huge impact. So there's a lot more data issues we could discuss in this. We're going to stop with this one because I think it is significant and it does show the impact of these kinds of problems on local decision makers.
So Joy, you said the next item we will look at is transparency and usability. What are we looking for there?
Great. Well, in the case of public organizations, the first thing we look is to see if they have an open data policy. And this is really standard out there. More and more municipalities are coming up with open data policies. And this is a way to share data with the citizens of the community so that they can share that data and do their own analysis. Some other things we look at is, can the audience verify information that's being shown? Can other users of the departments readily access the underlying data? We're not talking about private information. I don't need to know who has COVID. I just need to know how many people have COVID, and I need to know some details about where they live, their demographics, if they've been hospitalized, so that I make a good decisions and have a good analysis for the end user. And the other thing we look at is usability. Can users efficiently find the data they need? Are effective drill downs used in that report? And can you easily apply filters? Unfortunately, I think Kansas has some real issues in this area. Many of the reporters, legislators, and community members we spoke with have made requests for additional data or for information through the Freedom of Information Act, and they've been turned down. So, for example, KDHE has reportedly denied core requests for death by county data. That data is actually available publicly at usafacts.org. It's death by report date, not death date. So different date, but the same data. But KDHE has refused to release that information for privacy concerns, but it's already out there. It's also difficult to access data for review and analysis by business, nonprofits, and others. And Mackenzie, I was thinking about you. You spend hours every week inside the data pulling it. Could you give us a demonstration of what it takes to pull death, or walk us through how you pull death by date from KDHE's website?
Yeah,
so I'll pull that up and you can walk us through it.
Yeah, perfect. So I spend an average of 10 hours a week pulling data from KDHE's website. I pull the death data 3 times a week as soon as it's updated on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. So I go to the KDHE website, go to that death summary tab, and I drill out on that graph to see the month totals and compare them to the monthly totals that I've kept track of in a spreadsheet. You can mouse over these bars and see the total number of deaths per month. So especially during the reconciliation process that KDHE was conducting, the numbers would change all the way back to April or May, and the changes would continue throughout the summer months. Once I had documented these changes, I would drill back in on the graph and begin updating the daily data. Because these bars on this chart are so small, I have to zoom in on my screen to ensure that I do not miss a day. I mouse over every day of every month until I find the change. When you have over 200 data points to check, the process becomes very time consuming, and as the pandemic continues, there are more days to check.
I mean, right, when we first started this, there were only this many days to check. Now you're all the way out here in November and you're still
Exactly.
Right. You spend so many hours a week pulling data so that we can do the analysis on it. And really, that's one of the reasons sometimes people ask us, why don't we do more, or why don't we include more? One of the reasons is how difficult it is to get that data. You do the same thing for symptom data, for cases by symptom date for different counties, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's some data that we just can't even really review because we can't pull because those tooltips, which is what you're looking at when you mouse over each month, aren't available. So, for example, here's hospitalizations. We don't know what these numbers are. They clearly have gone up, but we don't know by how much or the scale. We know here we're under 500, but we don't know really what this number is at 570, 560. We're not sure. There's no way to get at that data.
And that number does matter.
Yeah, it does.
So let's talk about usability. Many of these visualizations are difficult to filter and manipulate. For example, for hospital capacity, they have a filter by date. You have to type it in, or you can look for the date rather than using a calendar. But I will say that this uses the actual month, day, year format. But on case rates, you do have to spell out the date.
Yeah, you do. On some of the filters, you have to spell out the date. And it would be much nicer if we had just that little calendar pop out, like you mentioned, that we can just go to the month we want and pick the date. And so the longer that this system gets data, the longer this drop-down box gets to try and pull the data back. Also, and these are things that are easily solvable, but we have to pull off all of the data to look at a specific area, and then we have to add that data back in that we want to look at, which is also time consuming. And when it comes to usability, the COVID page for KDHE is difficult. As you illustrated, users have trouble filtering data, but they also have trouble finding the data they want to review because it can be scattered across all of these multiple tabs. And at times it's been moved and people have had to go find it, or things have been removed and there's been no notes about that.
Yeah, so that brings us to communication. When you say that communication of data, what are you getting at?
Yeah, so, Carly Fiorini said the goal is to turn data into information and information into insight. And really that's why we do this work. You and I like looking at data and finding the patterns and playing with it and seeing what kinds of pictures we can make with it. But there's really a reason for that. And it's because we want to have insight into what's happening in our world, in the situation we're looking at. And that's really why businesses do it too. They don't pay our bill because they want a pretty picture. They want some kind of insight that they can make a decision from. So, really with communication, a couple of things we're looking at is who's the audience for the reports, and then once we know who the audience is, does the visualization match that audience, and does it lead that audience to make a decision or to better understand the issue? Will they draw correct conclusions by looking at it? We look to see if visuals match the defined goals and criteria. Does the detailed analysis confirm the summaries that are there? How are conflicts resolved? And sometimes definitions of data change over time. That's part of the process. But how do you document that? And how can your audience easily grasp that difference? And how do authors disclose corrected errors that have been made? So, when an error is made, do the authors share that? How, where? If the user isn't an experienced data analyst, they're really going to struggle to make sense of the KDHE COVID data. What you'd like to see in a crisis situation is the data is laid out in a way users can explore it for themselves and glean information easily. You want to lead your users to an accurate understanding of the issue and help empower them to make decisions, because ultimately what people are trying to do is protect the people they care about. In the beginning, we didn't have a good idea of what to track and what information to share with our users. Nobody did. And so a set of visuals and data that was available began to emerge, but now we're in November. We've been at this for a while. We have some more data. And, you know, in our business in August, September, we spent that month really rethinking our visuals and our audience and recreating so that people could better understand what's happening. And I think it's time for KDHE to reevaluate their data presentations and figure out the best way to share their data so that their insights inform the decision-making of leaders and citizens. So let's look at some examples of why we say that. I'm just gonna start with school gating criteria. So this is the school gating criteria that was adopted by the Kansas Department of Education. And it has, so here's, you know, when you're gonna be in remote versus on-site learning or a hybrid version. And the second page has the gating criteria, which we've talked about a lot. And probably the thing we're most familiar with. So in the gating criteria, there's a couple of things to remember. First of all, the color scheme uses green, yellow, orange, and red. So those are the colors that were decided on. And there's a set of criteria that determines how you get into each criteria, into each color. Thus our Know Your Color series that we've been doing for a while now. And these are the criteria that KDHE or the Kansas Department of Education suggested. And each school district has changed this, you know, to fit their schools, but this is the state level version of this. So one is student absenteeism in a building. Another is the 2-week county % positive rate, the 2-week cumulative county incidence rate, the trend, if you're going down in cases or up, and then the local referring hospital's capacity. So let's look at what happens when you go to KDHE's school gating metrics to try and figure out where you are in the color scheme. So first thing is building gating criteria, which there's nothing on here called building gating criteria. So I have to know enough to know that might mean student absenteeism. And I can go here to look, and sure enough, that is what it means. Now, even though I can look at this by county, this data really is not by building. So even if we go in and pull a specific county, like maybe Sedgwick has, I think we looked once, I think it has something like 10 different school districts, and they're all in different, they have different modes. Some of them are in remote, some of them, like Wichita is in full remote for middle school and high school. There is no hybrid option. So I don't know, when I look at this graph, there's not really enough information for me. I think this is for just schools that have kids on campus. So it would be just the elementary for Wichita Public Schools would be counted in here. But then there's a bunch of other, there's 101 schools reporting in this report. And so what I can see, but what I can't really tell is what's happening in my district, and do I have buildings that have, you know, things happening that's not in here. And then on top of that, we have this error where after November 1st, I really can't tell where my data is going. And I'm not really sure what this number means because it goes off the chart, and that still hasn't been fixed. So it's very difficult for a school board member or parent to come in and see where their building gating criteria would be. All right, so now I'm not going to hit the back button because that takes me completely out of this deck if I do that. So I have to go back to school gating metrics, and now I'm going to look for % positive. % positive is 2-week % positive case rate by county. And that's what it tells me it's going to be here. And that's what it tells me at the top, 2-week % positive case rate. But when I come down below, it's actually only the weekly % positivity. And it starts by telling me about the states by age group, which really doesn't, I don't need that because I'm coming in as an audience member to see what's going on in my county. The other thing I'm going to notice is the colors are different. You know, what happened to green? It's blue. Was there a fight between KDHE and Kansas Department of Education on whether to use green and blue, and one went green and one went blue, or did they just not pay attention to the details? But that matters. And then the next thing is down here below, I have a weekly % positive, and the only way to figure out, you know, I've got to sit down and do math, which, you know, it's not difficult math, but again, it's another step that I have to do. It's another step that the audience has to do to figure out where is Allen County really here between these two weeks. It's not listed anywhere. I have to, go somewhere else to get that 2-week value. All right, so we got through 2. We've had to do some work. We're still not sure about some things. So we'll go back and look at school gating. We'll go look for the 2-week incidence rate. Where is this 2-week cumulative incidence rate? Well, I don't have a 2-week incident rate unless there's no title for that. I happen to know that I can come to the state map and I can find it here. It's down here. I can hover over a county like Johnson County and see the incidence rate over the last 2 weeks is 557 per 100,000. Again, we talked about before, we don't know if this is community cases or if it includes residents of long-term care facilities or prisons. And we also don't know what happened the 2 weeks prior and the 2 weeks prior and the 2 weeks prior. So we can't see what trends are happening here. So I get a number, I get a color, again, colors that don't match the colors in the gating criteria, and I can't really see my trend. Well, then you would say, well, that's what this trend, 2-week trend in county incidence is. Okay, well, let's go find that. So here's my trend. Notice to go through each of these, I've had to jump around through different decks multiple times, which, it's a lot for somebody to do that just wants to know what's going on in their kid's school, in their district. So again, I've got a trend in incident rate. I'm supposed to be looking for a 2-week trend, what's happened over 2 weeks. But below, this is weekly cumulative incidence rate. And again, the colors, we've changed the word from stable to level. So I have to make that change in my head. And we've gone to red, green, and blue instead of the 4 colors in the other item. So how do I know whether it's yellow or orange for stable? And what is all this detail for? And do I, because this is at the top, a user is going to think this is the first thing they should be looking at. All right, well, I've gone through 4. Maybe I've started to get a story and figure out what's happening. Now I want to see what's going on in my hospitals. There's no hospital information here at all. No capacity, nothing by county. We can't even see where our county's at. We can only see where our region is at. And that's problematic on so many levels. We can start to get there. If we go to hospital capacity, we might be able to start to get there. But, okay, so now we're in South Central. But if I'm a data novice and I haven't spent a lot of time looking at this data, this graph is very difficult for me to understand. Why do numbers dip every few days down so much? I mean, is that what's going on there? And it's hard to see this trend that's happening down here where the numbers are actually I can't point at it, because if I do, I get tool times coming up over the top of it, but there's clearly a trend change happening, but it gets disrupted by this weekend. So what's going on there? It's very difficult to tell. And there's no real documentation here to help users walk through this. It's, and frankly, my experience with KDHE when I've asked questions about this screen is the answer is they don't procure the data. They're just getting it from the health, from the NHHN or from teletracking or HHS Protect. Well, that's great. You are getting that data from them. That is your source of data. But what you do with it to show the users of Kansas, the audience in Kansas, what it means, that's you. And so, let's take responsibility and make this easier for a person to understand what's happening here.
So we've only shared a few of the obvious issues that we've seen, but let's say we fix these issues and some of the others. What would the impact be? Would it just be prettier charts?
Well, let's face it, pretty charts would be great. We love pretty charts around here.
In the right direction.
Right, it would be a great step in the right direction. But really, in our experience, when these kinds of issues are resolved, the entire culture gets a lift, because instead of spending time trying to figure out what your 2-week positivity rate is, or firefighting issues with the data, or arguing over whether the data is correct or not, you start to see some other things happen. You see empowerment. In this case, if these issues were resolved, citizens could make better decisions for themselves and their families. Local school board members would have an easier time of it. The organization and its entities and citizens would spend so much less time arguing about data accuracy, for example, and more time figuring out what to do about this issue. Another lift that we see is in innovation. When we understand the real issues and empower others, people start finding ways to be innovative. Just like we're doing today, they step back from that day-to-day analysis, trying to get a grip on what's happening, what does this number mean and that number mean, and cross-checking it with that number. And they have time to figure out the next step forward that their organization needs to make and the next thing that they should be studying. And I think another really important one here is collaboration. Collaboration starts happening between departments in the government, but also between citizens and local leaders and business owners. You know, we've heard from public health officials in universities who've said that they are happy and approached KDHE and been happy to help and do analysis for them, to maybe do some kinds of studies for them. And the response at lots of different levels to public health officials in universities has been, we're so overwhelmed, we don't have time. And that's really the wrong answer. The answer needs to be, here's our data. What can you help us figure out about how we can better handle this pandemic? Because frankly, COVID is not just a health crisis. Our response has impacts to the economy, impacts on our children's education, and hence the future of the state, the fiber of society's social network, and frankly, mental health. But at this moment in time, all we're looking at is the number of cases, hospitalizations, testings, deaths. We have no window into how this is impacting our state and our way of life for the long term.
And let's just be clear that this isn't the fault of KDHE. Their job is to discuss the impact of COVID from a public health perspective.
Right, that is their job. The governor's job, however, is to rally the forces to look at this pandemic from all angles and look at data from every area that's been impacted. Right now, Governor Kelly is not doing that. She's focused on one layer of the data, and she's incorrectly used that data to attack her opponents and criticize local leaders in their response. Making progress on this difficult issue is going to require us to stop using data to point fingers and instead engage others to help empower citizens and local leaders to make informed decisions.
Well, Joy, I appreciate your time today. Thanks for pointing out these issues that we have seen. We have 2 more videos coming in this series, Analysis of Per Aspera and Ad Astra. One will show innovations that are emerging from other states in the Midwest, and one will highlight some best practices for how other data mature leaders are using data to inspire collaboration and empower their citizens. Please check out our website at www.cornerstonedata.com for our blog and to check out any more information that we provide. If you see our faces, go ahead and give this video a big thumbs up, and we will see you next time.